Bruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together in Daf Nun Ches Amud Aleph, 5 lines from the bottom. The Gemara had previously made a distinction between the bells that an Eved goes out with on Shabbos. It says that the bells that are around his neck, he may not go out on Shabbos with because they might fall off and he'll carry them. Daled Amos in the Rishus Harabim. Whereas if there's bells that are attached to his garments, since they're attached by sewing those bells to the garments, they're not going to become detached, whereby he's not going to then carry them in the Rishus Harabim. The Gemara now contrasts that to the behema, the animals who have bells around their neck or are connected to the blankets that cover the animals to protect them from getting dirty. There the Gemara now brings the following brisa. Amar Mar, lo teitze behema, lo bechoisam shebetzavora, the Brisa now quotes the part of the Brisa speaking about behemoths that are not going out, not with a choisam around their neck or a choisam attached to their garment. They cannot go out with bells not around their neck, and they cannot go out with bells that are attached to their clothing. And neither those bells nor the chosamois are mekabel tuma. Unlike when it comes to an adam, his bells are mekabel tuma. The Brisa now, the Gemara now goes on to say, "V'zug de behema ein mekabel tuma." The Gemara asks, is this so that the Brisa tells us that the zug, the bells of the animal, are not mekabel tuma? V'raminu zug shel behema tamei. It says in the Brisa that the bells of an animal are tamei. V'shel delis tor. Bells that are put on a door as a doorbell, since they're attached to the door which is attached to the ground, it's not mekabel tuma. The Brisa goes on to say, shel delis ve'aso lebehema tamei. If it was a doorbell that was taken off the door and then was put around the neck of an animal, that will then become tamei. The mere thought of a person changing the status renders it susceptible to tumah. So by putting it on the behema, his thought of wanting to be used for the behema now makes it so that it's going to be kabel tumah. Shel behema ve'aso ledelis. And the other direction, if it was on the neck of an animal, it was taken off and put on a delis. Afal pishe chibroi ledelis v'kavu b'meisorim. B'masmarim tamei. Even though he put it on the door as a doorbell, nonetheless, it will still remain tamei. In other words, the thought of merely transferring it from the animal to the door does not now take it away from its tumah status. It still can be susceptible to tumah. Here, the fact that it put it on the door, even if it then knocks it in, doesn't make it so that anything was changed with the doorbell itself. So the machshava over here says that it's enough to keep it in its status of tuma because the machshava is not enough to take it out of that status. Shekol kelim yordim lidimei tumason b'machshava, and the principle is that all of the kelim that will be then go down to the status of tuma, that's enough for the machshava to take a regular kli that was not yet finished. If the person then has in mind that it wants going to be a finished kli, it will now be susceptible to that machshava is enough. In the case, for example, for the deles to the behema, to take the bell from the deles and put it onto the behema, that's enough to then make it susceptible to tumah. Ve'ein oilin midei tumason. But if a person then takes an item that was already something that's susceptible to tumah, and by mere machshava he wants to transfer it, that's not enough. He needs to make a maisa. In this case, where the behema had a bell around its neck, so then it was susceptible to tumah. The fact that he now puts it onto a delis doesn't change the status that it's susceptible to tumah, unless he actually changes the bell. For example, if a craftsman takes a piece of leather, which has not really been finished, but in his mind now it's finished, it's enough to then make it a mat. That now makes it susceptible to tumah. The very fact that his machshava now changed it to a gemar kli. if he now wants to take it out of its status as a mat, and he now wants to make it into, let's say, a kli, sandals, for example, so then the fact that he now has a machshava that it's not a finished item doesn't take it out of its status as being something that's susceptible to tumah. Until he actually takes a knife and starts carving into the leather, only then does it now take it away from its status of being mekabel tumah. So we're left with the question, how could the prior brisa that we quoted on Amud Aleph say that the bells around the neck of a behema is not susceptible to tumah, and also the bells that are connected to its blanket, whereas this brisa says that the bells around the neck of a behema are going to be susceptible to tumah? Answers the Gemara, lo kasha, ha di'isle inbal, ha delesle inbal. The brisa that says that it is susceptible to tumah is talking about when there was the inbal, the piece that goes inside of the bell. We'll call it a clapper that makes the noise, that makes the ringing of the bell. Then it's mekabel tumah. But if the inbal was taken out of the bell, so then it's not going to then mekabel tumah. Ask the Gemara manavshach, whichever way you want. Imanahu, if the bell is a kli, afal pi delesle inbal, even doesn't have that piece inside, it's a kli should be mekabel tumah. Idlav manahu, if it's not a kli, inbal mashvele mana, does the fact that this piece that goes inside of the bell going to make it into a kli? Answers the Gemara, yes, it does. Kid Reb Shmuel bar Nachmeni, Rab Yonason. The Rab Shmuel bar Nachmeni, Rab Yonason, minayin lemashmiya kol bekli matochos shehu tomei. From where do we know that which makes a noise, a sound, inside a kli that is a metal kli, renders it something that's mekabel tumah, susceptible to tumah? Shenema brings the pasuk, kol davar asher yavoy ba'esh, anything that comes into fire, ta'aviru ba'esh, you can then take it out of its status with fire. And he learns the fact that it says kol davar, afilu dibur yavoy ba'esh, even dibur, even speech or even sounds that emanate from the metal, that also can come into fire, whereby it's being able to be susceptible to tumah as well. So we see over here that indeed, when you have the clapper, you have the inbal inside of the bell, it does make it now susceptible to tumah. Without that, it's not susceptible to tumah. Bumayu kimta bedelesle inbal. Are you going to make the akimta now that we're not talking about an inbal inside of it? That's why this brisa that we quote on Amud Aleph says that it's not mekabel tumah when it's either on the neck of the animal or if it's attached to the blanket that it covers up the animal. If that's so, then we have to be consistent with the rest of the brisa. Ema mitziyasa. The middle of the brisa talks about the eved says as follows: V'loi bezug shebetzavaroy. By the Eved, he does not go out with the Zug Shebet Savaro because it can fall off, whereby he'll then pick it up and carry it Dalet Amos Meshus Harabim. So the Rabbanan said that's Osir, to go out with the bell around its neck. But it can go out with a bell that is attached to the garment of the Eved, because we said it's sewed and attached very tightly, whereby it won't become detached. The Brisa goes on to say, V'zeh v'zeh mekablim tumah, and both these bells are mekabel tumah. So therefore, if that's so, we're talking about a bell that doesn't have an inbal. Either lesle inbal mi mekabel tumah. If it doesn't have the inbal, how is it mekabel tumah? Asks the Gemara. V'raminu, and further from another brayta we can ask: Ha'oise zogin lemachteshes, one who makes bells for a mortar to grind herbs. Ula arisos, or puts bells for the baby's crib to lull the baby into sleeping. Ula mitpachois svarim, or for the cover of sifrei, of scrolls like Torah scrolls. Ula mitpachois tinokos, or the coverings that they would put on a tinoik around its neck that would have bells on it. Yesh lohen imbal, if it has indeed the piece, the clapper inside the bell. Tamein. Ein lohem inbal, if it doesn't have the clapper inside. Taharin, it's going to be tor. Nitlu in belehen adayin tu maso alein. If it was a bell that had become tamei, and you take out the clapper, the inbal from inside of it, the bell still remains tamei. So we see from here that indeed, that even though that only if it became tamei, but if indeed the inbal was taken out from the bell, is not mekabel tuma. And yet we have now two questions. Before we said that if the imbal is not in place of the bell, then it's not mekabel tuma, and here we have a brisa that supports that as well. So how can you tell me that the eved, his bell is mekabel tuma when we're talking about an imbal without the imbal? Hanimili answers the Gemara, betinoik de lekola avidele. This latter brisa that we just mentioned, that talks about the tinoik in the crib or the other things, all of this is talking about where you need the kol, you need the voice, you need the sound of the bell. That's why only with the inbal inside does it become something that's mekabel tuma, because it's a viable kli, it's something that's useful. Aval godol tachshit hu lei afagad the lesle inbal. But in regards to the eved, there's another aspect that gives the bell significance to make it into a kli to mekabel tuma, and that is the fact that it gives the eved the status of being adorned when it's wearing that bell. So even if it does not have the inbal, it's mekabel tuma.